Welcome back, everybody, for the second part of my State of the Civilizations 2022 series. So if you haven't watched the first part yet, definitely check it out. It'll be in the description below. But regardless, for a quick recap, as we bring in the new year, I thought it would be an excellent opportunity to take stock of the 39 civilizations currently in AoE2 DE and see where they are right now in terms of design and balance. Then, for the sake of comparison, we'll rank the civs by placing them on a tier list. I already outlined the tiers in the first part, so again, check that out if you want more details. But before we dive into the civs today, I do just want to say that these videos take a ton of time and energy to make, so if you are hyped for this next part, please be sure to leave a like and drop a comment as to what you think of the civs today. Sellout complete, let's get back to the civs. And we get the ball rolling with quite the interesting civilization, the polarizing Age of Kings classic, the Goths. Yeah, I'm gonna just slam these guys into the major changes needed tier right away. So as many issues as the Goths face, at least their identity isn't one of them. They are the infantry civ in AoE2. I mean, the civ has two specific infantry bonuses, an infantry team bonus, an infantry unique unit, and two incredibly powerful infantry unique tacs, and I just said the word infantry way too many times. But beyond being focused on just foot soldiers, the Goths also have the distinct characteristic of being the cheap, spammy infantry civ, prioritizing production and sheer numbers to individual unit quality. This is what gives Goths such a reputation in the AoE2 community. Oftentimes, once the Goth flood gets going, it becomes really difficult to deal with, especially for certain civilizations. Their Huskarl unique unit is a core part of this army, as its role of an anti-archer infantry means the Goth player can make infantry work in almost all situations, at least in the late game. To offset that, the other super noticeable aspect of Goths is that their tech tree, and particularly their defenses, are absolutely abysmal. It means it's difficult to get to that point where you can spam infantry because you need a powerful economy to keep up with your unit production. And when it comes to non-infantry options, Goths do notably have access to gunpowder, which is certainly helpful, but their archers, cavalry, and siege options are somewhere between mediocre and average. So this leads us to the issue with the Goths, or at least one of them. The civ is just so much of a one-trick pony. The sheer strength of their infantry spam gives them an incredibly polarizing matchup spread, notably performing horribly against other strong infantry civilizations like Teutons, Vikings, and Celts, but performing extremely well versus archer civs like Mayans, Ethiopians, and Vietnamese. Obviously, we want civilizations to have unique strengths and naturally good and bad matchups, but with Goths, it feels a little too extreme. Furthermore, their lack of strong defenses or economy makes the civ really mediocre on most map types, unless you do manage to roll one of their amazing matchups. But this just leads to a lot of not very fun experiences for both the Goth player and the not Goth player. Lastly, with the Goths, they also have some really weird and, in my opinion, problematic bonuses. In Dark Age, Goths have become a top-tier laming civ due to their instantly researched loom technology, cheap militia, and extra bonus damage against wild boar. Especially since the civ has so many mediocre matchups, it's very common for a Goth player to just go forward with some early loomed villagers to start killing the opponent's huntables and walling in their resources. Those games can be fun every once in a while, but it should never be the norm for a civ. In particular, the extra bonus damage versus boar is really only useful when laming, as when you normally take your oinkers, you have plenty of villagers shooting at it anyway. Overall, Goths are just such a clunky civilization that is also just challenging to balance. I'm not saying that I have all of the answers, but the civ has always been so polarizing. I think it would be for the best to at least move it a bit closer to a happy middle ground by making their infantry play a bit weaker and their everything else play a little bit stronger. For our second civ, we move on to the good friends of the Goths, the fan favorite Huns, who of course hail from the Age of Conquerors expansion. Even if they don't quite fit the AoE2 timeframe, this civ is honestly just such a classic, as many players have enjoyed 1v1 Hun mirrors on Arabia for the past 2 decades. They did possess some small issues back in AOC, but with some well-targeted adjustments made in the recent years, Attila and friends will find themselves in the complete tier. So with the Hunnic identity as an AoE2 civ, they're pretty much the barbarians that ransacked the Roman Empire personified. Their most iconic bonus is that they don't need to build houses at the cost of starting with half the wood, which ends up being a very powerful wood and villager time-saving bonus from the early to mid-game. On top of that though, the Hun house bonus actually makes your base building process look quite different to most civilizations. As it happens, houses make up quite a large percent of the number of buildings in your town, which not only makes the Hunnic base look more like a small camp or occupied village rather than a big fortified city, but it also means that it's much trickier to wall in the early game. Even their unique unit, the Tarkin, is literally a mounted raider wielding a torch as a weapon and dealing bonus damage against buildings. But beyond the Tarkin, Huns have a very lean tech tree, by which I mean they have everything they need to be successful, but nothing else. No matter what, the core of your army is likely going to be cavalry and cav archers when playing as the Huns. It's not only what they do well, but it's pretty much the only thing they do semi-decently. Now, as far as balance goes, Huns are all about aggression on open maps. Like I said, for a long time, one of the most common game types were 1v1 Hun wars on Arabia, because the civilization possesses a ton of different viable early to mid-game option, and few ways to defend, leading to fast-paced games. Today, Huns face a lot more competition when it comes to strong Arabia civs, but still manage to hang up there as one of the better picks. Huns also perform quite well on hybrid maps, especially the ones with only a small amount of water, like Four Lakes, because the civ ends up saving a ton of wood in the early to mid-game for navy, and then also has all of their strong aggressive options on land. Their weakness naturally comes on the more late-game oriented maps, as well as full-on water maps and Nomad. I'd say it's a nice distribution of strengths and weaknesses. Overall, like I said, Huns are just such a classic civilization in AoE2. Between their cavalry and archers, you have several viable army compositions in the early to mid-game, and their Tarkin unique unit even has a solid niche now as an anti-archer, anti-building cavalry, thanks to their Marauders tech enabling their production at the stable. Even the joke unique tech of Atheism at least does something now in 1v1s as it reduces enemy relic income. Really, I've just got to quote Mem and say that Huns are Huns! Oh boy, we now turn to the first of the I civilizations from the Forgotten expansion, the Incas. So yeah, Incas are going to be our second of our American civilizations, but will also unfortunately be falling into the somewhat problematic tier. When comparing the Amerindian Civ triplets, you have Aztecs being the gold-intensive infantry and monk civ, Mayans being the cost-efficient archer civ, and Incas rounding out the crew as the defensive and counter-unit civ. As far as an identity goes, that sounds alright for Incas, and to some extent, it does play out that way. The Incan unique units are the Kamiyuk, which is a powerful spearman with one range, and the Slinger, who is essentially an archer that gets the same bonus damage versus infantry as a hand cannoneer. Both of these units are quite powerful in their respective roles, but both are notably quite expensive for being counter units. You then throw in Eagle Warriors as your anti-archer and anti-siege unit, and hopefully you can start to see why I like to characterize the Incas as the gold-intensive counter unit civilization. This all plays into the Incas' defensive playbook, as well as their 15% cheaper stone cost for all of their buildings, and villagers that benefit from infantry blacksmith upgrades. Of course, compared to Mayans and Aztecs, Incas don't really have much in the way of military bonuses, having none. And even all of their eco bonuses are fairly small. With Incas, it's all about powerful counter units and a broad tech tree. And this brings us to the problems with Incas, of which there are several. First, we have the issue of their awkward villager blacksmith bonus. As I'm sure many of you remember, the Incan villagers used to benefit from the infantry blacksmith upgrades as soon as you researched them, aka in the feudal age. This led to the rise of the Noboru Rush, named after the old school Japanese player of the same name, who used it all the time on the ladder. This strategy would be to go up to feudal age very quickly, send around a third of your villagers forward, get scale mail armor, and your villagers suddenly deal 2 damage to enemy villagers, whereas they would only deal 1 damage to you. Now, this strategy was controversial to say the least, and ultimately the devs did decide to remove it by requiring castle age for the villager bonus to apply. However, since then, Incas have just kind of been hanging around. They're still a solid option on pretty much any land map, but are never quite near the top, and are especially overshadowed by the much more aggressive Aztecs and Mayans. They also have, in my opinion, the single worst team bonus in the game, as faster building farms doesn't really do much. Therefore, Incas still have some work to be done. Like I said, the basic design is there, and the overall power level is reasonably high. It's just they never quite shine on any given setting. In my opinion, the removal of the Noboru Rush was very much for the best, as it was just incredibly unfun to play against, but Incas now could use some sort of small military bonus to help round them out. If even they just get a slight boost to their army, like say, slightly cheaper Eagle Warriors, then people will remember that Incas can be really, really scary to deal with. Well, it's time. Our next civilization is the second I Civ from the Forgotten expansion, and that is the Indians. Now, for each of these videos, I make sure that no one Civ script is longer than 3 minutes, or about 600 words. However, I'm definitely going to break that rule here, as the Indians will be the only civilization going into the fundamental rework tier. Alright, let's get this show on the road by talking about the identity of the Indian civilization in AoE2. Now, as many people have pointed out over the years, Indian history is simply so large and complex that distilling it all into one civilization is pretty much impossible. That said, the in-game Indians are more or less based on the Rajputs of northwest India, and are therefore considered a camel and gunpowder civilization. Despite several nerfs over the years, Indian camels are indeed quite powerful thanks to their imp camel upgrade, but the gunpowder designation is to me pretty off. I mean, yeah, Indians have most of the gunpowder options, as well as a unique tech that improves hand cannoneer range, but they miss bombard tower and any other gunpowder specific bonus. It just seems like kind of weird to me. With that in mind, I'll just say that I have some issue with every single bonus and unique unit of the Indian civilization except their eco bonus of the discounted villagers, and their Castle Age unique tech sultans, which improves their gold income. So let's just speed run through the rest of the bonuses, unique units, and unique techs. First, fishermen work plus 10% faster. This bonus essentially allows Indians to double dip and have 2 early game food bonuses on maps with lots of shorefish. Many custom and tournament maps feature early game shorefish, or even deep fish that villagers can access right away, and Indians instantly become just a top pick on any of those maps. I would either get rid of the bonus completely, or at least give it to a civ that doesn't have another early game food bonus. Next, stable units gain +1 Pierce Armor in Castle Age and another +1 in Imperial Age. As I'm sure many of you know, this comes at the cost of the Plate Barding Armor upgrade, which means that Indian camels and light cav get 1 extra Pierce Armor over a generic civ in the Castle Age, but actually get worse armor overall in the Imperial Age due to missing the 1 melee armor that is granted by the Plate Barding Armor technology. On top of just being really weird, it also overlaps with the Turk bonus for extra Pierce Armor for their scouts, as Indian scouts and Turk scouts are exactly the same in Castle Age. It's so odd to have a civ bonus that becomes strictly a detriment in the late game. As we've learned over the years, Indian camels are really tricky to balance, but man, do we need to go back to the drawing board when it comes to this bonus. Team bonus, camel units gain +4 attack versus buildings. This bonus is like obsidian arrows. It turns a unit that's supposed to be bad versus buildings into being good versus buildings. Yes, it does have some fun interactions with camel archers and Mamelukes, but overall, I'm just not a big fan of this bonus. It's often a win more kind of thing, because if the Indian player's already pressuring buildings with a bunch of camels, the opponent is probably in a rough spot already, and it just makes the game snowball even harder. Don't get me wrong, this is nowhere near as egregious as obsidian arrows or even the old Saracen bonus, but it's still not something that sits too well with me. Unique unit time, first with the elephant archers. As fun as it is to meme around with these guys, especially if you're MBL, Ele archers are still fundamentally way too expensive for what you're getting. It's pretty much a worse version of the war wagon in most aspects, and is only useful when fighting masses of enemy archers in the late game. Now, any elephant unit is difficult to balance, but at least with Persian war elephants, you get what you're paying for. Not so the case with the Ele archer, or ballista elephants, but that topic is not for another 3 sections. Their other unique unit, the Imperial Camel. An interesting idea, but as I mentioned earlier, it's just so difficult to balance. It's another expensive tech for a gold unit, and is therefore difficult to afford in 1v1 games, which leaves Indians with actually below average heavy camels because you do miss that 1 melee armor. Not too much you can do with this unit in my opinion, except perhaps make it a replacement to the heavy camel upgrade in the same way that Winged Hussar is a replacement to the regular Hussar upgrade for Lithuanians and Poles. Finally, their Imperial Age unique tech, Shatagni. This one I'm totally fine with in theory, as an extra 1 range for your hand cannons is quite nice, as it puts them on par with arbalests and skirmishers. However, like Greek Fire, it makes hand cannons even less accurate at their maximum range, which is just something that should be fixed. Okay, now that we've gone through all of these issues, let's zoom back out to look at the broad picture with Indians. Here, we find ourselves with a civilization that can be incredibly powerful, like on shorefish maps and in pocket and team games, but it's just also so awkward in other situations. Yes, Indians did have an excellent win rate in KOTD4, but as I said in my recap video for that event, in my opinion, that's simply because most of their worst matchups never happened due to bans. This civ just does not like facing any sort of infantry civ, or even strong archer civs. They can feel kind of meh. I'll wrap this up by just underlining that I don't think all of the aspects of Indians are bad, nor do I think that they're the least powerful civ in the game, only that they possess the least cohesive design. If there's any civ that needs to go to the spa for a complete makeover, that civ would unfortunately be the Indians. Well, it can only go up from here, so with that out of the way, we'll move on to the last of the civs from the Forgotten expansion, the Italians. Although not perfect, the civilization will be landing a solid mid-tier something is off placement. In-game, the Italians are listed as an archer and naval civilization, which I'd say is pretty accurate, although I'd perhaps call them the discount civilization, since all 4 of the civ bonuses and one of their unique techs comes in the form of some sort of discount. Personally, I think that having so many bonuses simply being discounts of some kind is pretty boring, but it's not the worst design offense in the world and I can live with it. Getting back to the whole naval thing, Italians are certainly certainly going to be known as one of the very best water map civs in AoE2. The cheaper age-up, fishing ships, and dock techs simply give the civilization so much flexibility in how they can approach any sort of water or hybrid map. They can go fast feudal aggression, greedy fish boom, or even fast castle into fire ships. I think all of that is totally fine personally, as Italians still notably have the weakness in that they don't actually have any military bonuses for their navy. Therefore, if you miss their timing advantages, they will begin to fall flat against strong military naval civs like Vikings, Portuguese, and Byzantines. Now, you could make the argument that they are a little too strong on water maps, and I can maybe see that, but personally, I still think that they're totally in line with the other top water civs. In addition to their navy, I like the concept and implementation of both Italian unique units with their Genoese crossbowmen and condottiero. It definitely took some iterating on each, but they feel like they fill their roles of being an anti-cavalry foot archer and an expensive, fast, anti-gunpowder team infantry. Unfortunately, Italians do run into some issues when it comes to most land maps. They're middling on Arabia and a bit above average on Arena. The issue is more that the civ just isn't very exciting to play. It's like, oh, hey, cool, I can save some resources and age up a bit earlier, and then I can research ballistics and chemistry a bit cheaper, and that's kind of it. Their broad tech tree is great and all, but it's just not really the most fun civ in the world to play on pretty much any land map, at least in my opinion. And yes, in general, Italians are a pretty well-rounded civilization, being top tier on water maps, but it's still at least relatively strong on most land maps. You could make the argument that they are a bit too flexible and strong on water, but thanks to some small nerfs over the past year or so, Italians are at least much more in line with the other top naval civs, like I said. Although their unique units and even unique techs are all nice, the downfall of this civilization is simply that they aren't very exciting to play on most land maps. Until you get your Genbos and Pavisa and cheap gunpowder and whatnot, Italians just feel a little bit generic. Moving past the letter I, we now make it to the one civilization that starts with the letter J, and that is of course the Japanese, who are also one of the OG Age of Kings civilizations. On the back of some recent changes to their samurai unique unit, Japanese will get that extra bump to enter the lofty complete tier. So according to the game, the Japanese are classified purely as an infantry civilization, and although it's true that their infantry is great, I would also add naval civilization to their title. First, looking at the infantry side of the equation, Japanese are all about individual unit quality, so pretty much the anti-Goths. You get all the barracks units and relevant techs, an infantry unique unit, and one of the single best infantry-related military bonuses in the game in their 33% faster attack speed starting in the feudal age. That, combined with the powerful Japanese early eco bonus of 50% cheaper drop-off sites, gives the civilization arguably the most deadly men-at-arm rush out there. Their infantry remains strong throughout the game, of course, but as you enter the mid-game, the Japanese tech tree expands quite a bit, as you have a 100% complete archery range, knights with bloodlines and husbandry, and even excellent monks. The natural downside to this is that, at least on land maps, the civ has absolutely no economy bonus past early game, kind of necessitating that you get something done in that early game when you have all of those advantages. You also take a bit of a hit past early Imperial Age, as your cavalry quickly becomes mediocre due to lacking hussar and plate-barding armor, leaving you with very few population-efficient options. Samurai can be great if you can get them going, which is easier thanks to a recent buff, but even then, the unit will still struggle versus strong archers and heavy cavalry. Nevertheless, the Japanese do get a few tricky options with their deadly keeps that fire 3 arrows, even when ungarrisoned, some of the best trebuchets, and even fully upgraded heavy cav archers. All of this to say is that the Japanese are a really dynamic civilization throughout the game, possessing very noticeable moments of strength and weakness, but even in their weak areas, they still have some options. In my opinion, this is the hallmark of a well-designed civ. On water, Japanese are also a strong contender. Yes, they are perhaps a small step below Italians on full water maps, but likely a bit better on very aggressive maps where you're docking right next to your opponent. This is why Japanese are such a common pick on maps like Four Lakes, where your tanky fishing ships can survive early pressure, your early wood savings can give you an advantage when trying to take the water, and the efficiency of your fish boom gives you that extra incentive to win the water. Still, as great as that is, like Italians, Japanese do have the weakness of not having any real military bonus to their navy, meaning they do fall off a bit in the late game. To conclude, the Japanese do a fantastic job of filling that more military-focused infantry and navy type of civilization. Before the recent patch where Castle Age Samurai got buffed, I would have likely knocked down the Civ a tier, but thankfully, I got to make these videos after those changes. Well, if I do any more praising of the Japanese, I'll probably sound too much like Spirit of the Law, so I think we can just end this section here. Moving right along, we now turn to our second Rise of the Rajas civilization, the Khmer. These guys have had quite the wild ride throughout their history when it comes to both balance and design, and although they're certainly getting there, I still believe they fall into the somewhat problematic tier. As usual, speaking first on the concept of the Khmer Civ in AoE2, the in-game tech tree denotes them as a siege and elephant civilization. I mean, in this instance, siege pretty much just means scorpions, but sure, overall, fine. Nevertheless, for most players, the most memorable aspect of the Khmer is their top-tier economy. Two bonuses here help contribute to this. Your ability to age up without any building prerequisites, which can save you a ton of wood in the early game and get you some really quick fast castle timings. Then you have your farming bonus, where your villagers do not need to drop off their food at the mill and even deposit the resources into your stockpile as they collect them. This in effect gives Khmer some of the best farmers in the game. So with an early wood bonus and a mid-late game food bonus, the Khmer are always going to be well prepared to execute any strategy they want, and it's certainly a hallmark of the Civ. Naturally, with great economy comes great holes in your tech tree. Yeah, that one didn't really work out. Khmer possess only a middling archery range and a mediocre barracks, and other than scorpions and elephants, the Civ doesn't have any military bonus. In my opinion, this dynamic is totally fine, as the Civ doesn't need any sort of military bonus for the more common units you see in a regular game. Still, for late game and team games, Khmer can of course flex their might of the battle elephants and scorpions. The strong economy and reasonably flexible military also give Khmer a fighting chance on pretty much any map type, except really on full water maps. Alas, all is not well in the jungles of Cambodia, as Khmer suffer from a few notable issues. First, I need to address the literal elephant in the room, the ballista elephant. Not only is this unit just really weird and silly looking, but it's also just straight up bad. They lack the range and damage of scorpions, as well as the sheer damage of battle elephants. The only realistic use for the unit is the gimmick where they can cut down forests, a trait otherwise exclusive to trebuchets, onagers, and siege onagers. So in most cases, the ballista elephant might as well have zero damage, since you're just making one to cut trees. I could go on about all the things I don't like about the ballista elephant, but I do need to address another couple of issues with Khmer. First, it feels like to me the civilization is in practice most well known for its late game hussar spam. That's not really what the Khmer are supposed to excel at in my opinion, and it only exists because the Civ received the hussar tech before they got their farming bonus. I don't know, it just doesn't sit well with me. Then lastly, as great as their elephants and scorpions are, we just so rarely get to see those units, so it feels like kind of a letdown. Regardless, overall, the Khmer aren't in a terrible spot balance-wise. They have plenty of strong maps, and one of the coolest eco bonuses, and they're not needing to build buildings to unlock other buildings or age up, and some epic late game options with their elephants and scorpions. Nevertheless, they still earn a somewhat problematic rating due to their terrible unique unit and gameplay that doesn't quite feel congruent with how the Civ should look, at least in my eyes. We now go to a Civ that is very near and dear to my heart, the Koreans, who of course hail from the Conqueror's expansion. Now, the Civ was historically pretty one-dimensional with towers and post-imp, but have since received some solid changes to bring Koreans up to a decent something is off tier. Interestingly, the Koreans actually had their in-game Civ classification change. Back in AOC, they used to be a tower and naval civilization, and now they're a more broad defensive and naval civilization. Speaking to those defenses, Koreans indeed boast some of the strongest defenses in the game, and can be very difficult to dislodge on most map types. Your Civ bonuses of faster working stone miners, free tower upgrades, and their Upsong unique tech, and even their newer bonus of free archer armor upgrades all play into this identity. Personally, I see Byzantines, Koreans, and Teutons as the three most defensively oriented Civs in the game, and among those three, I consider Koreans to be the more long-range focused, Teutons to be the most melee focused, and Byzantines of course falling somewhere in between. Koreans just have a ton of deadly ranged options from their almost complete archery range, strong towers, deadly siege onagers and bombard cannons, and of course their war wagon unique unit. So yes, the Civ is not really an Arabia powerhouse, but at least they aren't awful anymore, and Koreans do excel on closed maps, most water maps, as well as Nomad, so I still think there is plenty of application for this Civ. Still, as their tier placement indicates, I do believe that there are still a few things off with Koreans. First, we have the Turtle Ship unique unit. It has received several small buffs over the years, and can be a strong option in the Castle Age. However, I believe that specifically elite turtle ships are really lacking as a late game water unit. In my view, the primary issue here is that elite turtle ships don't get any additional range on their Castle Age variant, so they go from being down 2 range compared to war galleys in Castle Age, to being down 4 range compared to fully upgraded galleons in Imperial Age. There could be other potential changes to the unit, but that is the direction I would take. Lastly, I have some small issues with the other Korean unique unit, the War Wagon. Now, unlike a lot of people, I'm totally fine with the War Wagon being a completely fictitious unit. The War Wagon Warwagon may not have existed in Korean history, but the unit's role of being a tanky, defensively oriented cav archer is pretty spot on with how Koreans did most of their fighting during the Middle Ages. Anyway, my concern is how this unit operates in-game, especially since Koreans received the free archer armor upgrades. Warwagons can be very difficult to deal with for some civilizations, especially against all-ins. Therefore, I could maybe see some small balance tweaks for the unit. Regardless, Koreans have come a very long way from their tower rush or bust days, with their wood discount and free archer armor upgrades giving the civilization strong tools for more orthodox game plans on both land and water maps. They may not be everyone's favorite civ to play, but I still find slowly grinding down my enemies with warwagons, towers, and siege onagers to be one of the most satisfying experiences in all of AoE2. Next up, we turn to a new favorite among the AoE2 community, the Lithuanians, who entered the game with the launch of DE as part of the last Khan's civilizations. So yeah, there are some aspects of this civ that are kinda controversial, and I personally feel that some of that is warranted, at least enough for a somewhat problematic rating. So in-game, the Lithuanians are deemed to be a cavalry and monk civilization, which as we'll see is pretty accurate. The most famous bonus for Lithuanians is certainly going to be their unique relic bonus, where their knights and Lechai unique units gain +1 attack per garrisoned relic up to +4 attack total. As of a somewhat recent balance patch, this potential is compensated by the lack of the blast furnace technology, but still, fully juiced up Lithuanian paladins will even beat Frank paladins in a straight up fight. Such a strong bonus gives the civ a big incentive to scoop up any and all relics on the map, and their faster working monasteries team bonus and extra starting food can give the Lithuanian player the means to do that. To round things out, Lithuanians do possess a very broad tech tree and a powerful bonus and unique tech to their spearmen and skirmishers. Really, the only negative aspect of this civ is their mediocre siege options, although you do at least get bombard cannons. Also, you do miss a long-term eco bonus. Still, Lithuanians are powerful and diverse enough to perform well on almost any map type. And this honestly brings us to the issues I have with Lithuanians, most of which are going to be related to the imbalanced nature of their bonuses. Right off the bat, although the Lithuanian bonus of starting with an extra 150 food can open up some unique strategies, it also leads to several balance issues. In particular, on hybrid maps, Lithuanians are a top-tier civ simply because they can send their villagers to wood right away without having to worry about idle time. For a civ that is supposed to be balanced around not having an eco bonus, the earlier fishing can easily snowball into a massive eco lead on any sort of hybrid or nomad map. This just doesn't feel quite right to me. There are also some smaller issues around laming and villager rushing associated with this bonus, but the whole hybrid map thing is I think the biggest issue. Now, the other big problem area for Lithuanians is their relic bonus. In my opinion, this makes Lithuanians even more of a snowball-y civ, because getting relics is something that you can only safely do when you're ahead. The extra gold income does help you, but is still a much more long-run effect. With the extra cavalry attack, collecting relics is something that you can do when you're ahead, and that just gets you more ahead, often creating a just insurmountable advantage. Conversely, if you're behind and trapped in your base, you can't collect the relics, and then you just can't take advantage of one of your best bonuses. Some people like this dynamic with Lithuanians, but I'm just not a big fan. In all, Lithuanians are a bit of a problematic civ. In many situations, they do play out quite nicely, have good and bad matchups, and certain settings where they do better than others. They also possess a solid identity with their cavalry, monks, and trash. However, there are certain situations that are fairly common that Lithuanians can really bend, if not outright break. So, somewhat problematic tier it is. We next go from the Hussar Civ to the Hussar Civ with the Magyars, who are probably the most popular civilization from the Forgotten expansion. They are a decent option in many situations, but I believe that there is just something missing with Magyars, which will land them in the something is off tier. In-game, the Magyars are naturally considered to be a cavalry civilization, and like the Huns, also possess excellent cav archers to boot. In fact, Magyars and Huns share a lot of similarities, with the Magyar niche being the steppe tribe that settled down into a more traditional European kingdom. Although the civ misses any sort of eco bonus, Magyars are nevertheless a deadly aggressive option on any sort of open map. The free blacksmith attack upgrades and cheaper scout cavalry gives the civ one of the best scout rushes out there, although their men-at-arm rush is also quite potent. But back to the Magyars versus Huns thing, if the Hun power curve throughout a game is like a steady increase that tapers off in post-imp, Magyars approach a similar army composition in a different way. Their power curve is all about power spikes when reaching the next age, as well as possessing a very cost-efficient efficient post-Imperial Age. These power spikes come from the free attack upgrades, and the post-Imperial strength comes from their Magyar Hussar unique unit, which can serve as an extremely strong replacement to the regular Hussar, even boasting an attack bonus versus siege units. On top of that, the recurve bow unique tech gives their cav archers extra range and attack, making them much easier to keep alive. Of course, this does come at a cost, because Magyars, like I said, really miss any sort of eco bonus and or boost to their cav archers before post-imp. That's why I said that the Magyar strengths are in their timings. If they find themselves in a more standard passive game, they will feel underwhelming until you get to post-imp. This brings me to the biggest issue I have with Magyars, and that's how they don't really have a setting in which they are really strong outside of Empire Wars. Missing any sort of eco bonus is just such a big issue, as you're reliant on doing damage to your opponent to get ahead. Mongols are also a civ that you really need to get some early damage done to get ahead, but in their case, they get a strong bonus in the Dark Age, whereas Magyars have to wait until Feudal Age. On open and aggressive maps, this is a massive difference, as Magyars aren't able to do the super fast uptimes that a civ like Mongols or even Lithuanians can. That is not to say that the civilization is bad, and they're still above average, but there's just a lot of stiff competition for strong Arabia civs. Overall, I may have placed Magyars in the something is off tier, but I'd say that they're much more accurately in a something is missing tier. They're a decent civ, and not much more. However, they do have their niche, including the unique distinction of being the only civ with access to fully upgraded arbalests and paladins. Really, in my opinion, all they need is a small eco boost specifically in the mid-game, and they are off to the races, or raids in this case. The train of M-civs continues with our third Rise of the Rajas civilization, the Malay. This is another civ that has received a pretty large number of changes since launch, but these have been largely successful in my view, and we finally get another civ to join Britons and Celts in the almost there tier. So for some reason, the Malay are the only civ in the game to solely have the naval civilization designation. Everybody else gets a something and naval civ, like infantry or archers or whatever. If I had to pick a non-aquatic focus for Malay, I would go with infantry, but we'll get to that later. When it comes to a defining civ bonus, the Malay clearly have their 80% faster age up speed. This is a really cool economy bonus in my opinion, because it can be used in a ton of different ways. You can use it to age up quickly for the purposes of aggression, but remember that you will have gathered fewer resources than you may expect, so generally this bonus is used to click up later and with more villagers. If we're looking at a TC that's more or less always working, a Malay player will have around 2 more villagers when hitting the feudal age compared to a generic civ, and another 3-ish on top of that when getting to the castle age. And this is what makes Malay so powerful on closed maps, where you can reliably go for a fast castle strategy and get an almost 5 villager advantage over other civs. Even after that, quickly advancing to the Imperial Age can allow you to hit some deadly timings. Speaking of which, for land maps, Malay are clearly focused around infantry and archers, including fully upgraded arbalests, skirmishers, and halberdiers. They may miss the champion upgrade for swordsmen, but their forced levy unique tech removes the gold cost for your swordsmen, giving you, as I call them, two-handed trashmen. In a similar vein, their unique unit, the Karambit Warrior, is an extremely cheap and weak infantry that only costs 0.5 population space. Of course, Malay are notable in being the only civilization that can train cavalry that misses the chain barding armor or +2 defense upgrade. This makes their knights and scouts absolutely dreadful, although their extremely cheap battle elephants can serve as a situational power unit. So when it comes to why Malay are only almost there, we have to look at the civ on water and hybrid maps. In general, this is all quite good, as Malay have a good eco in the fish traps that don't technically last forever but might as well. Their extra dock line of sight can also be quite nice as well when it comes to finding early fish. The issue comes with their unique building, the harbor. As it stands, the harbor is just a pretty weak building when it comes to filling that strong naval defense role. Of course, it kinda has to be weak because it currently replaces docks once you research thalassocracy, meaning they only cost 150 wood to build. Personally, I would like to see the harbor become a separate building than the dock, where you can give it a stone cost so you can make the building more powerful, and in my opinion interesting. Still, Malay are a good, well-balanced civ in AoE2. They're definitely a bit tricky to play, but this can be extremely rewarding in the right circumstances. The cheap but weak theme is prevalent in a number of army compositions, and their economy is fantastic on both land and water. Yes, harbors need a bit more tweaking, but for a civ that was honestly horribly balanced at launch, Malay are looking quite good at an almost there rating. exciting. Our second to last civ today will be the third entry from the African Kingdoms expansion, the Malians. And as proof that I am not 100% biased in favor of the old school civs, Malians will be joining the complete tier. Still, jokes aside, I do genuinely believe that Malians are a very dynamic civilization. The game calls them an infantry civ, and okay, sure, why not? But in practice, the Malian focus is on having a solid economy, broad tech tree, but missing some key options in the late game. Personally, in many ways, I see them as a more aggressively oriented Chinese, what with the strong economy and flexible tech tree and so on. For bonuses, Malians have several notable ones, from their 15% cheaper wood cost for buildings as the core of their economy, to their 30% longer lasting gold mines as their mid to late game eco bonus. Then, that leaves their extra pierce armor for barracks units as their main military bonus. Now, as I always like to mention, it is worth noting that Malians are the only civ in the game to possess a 100% perfect tech tree through the Castle Age, minus the pseudo-unique units of Eagle Warriors, Battle Elephants, and Steppe Lancers. The strong economy combines with this broad tech tree to allow the Malian player to easily adapt to whatever situation they are thrown in, as you can reliably go through any strategy up through the mid-game. Here, the cheaper wood cost on your buildings really helps in terms of those tech switches. Of course, this does come at a cost, because Malians miss some very key Imperial techs, like Bracer, Halberdier, Siege Ram, and Blast Furnace. Still, the Civ does have some options if things go late, like their powerful but fragile Gebetto unique unit, champions with 8 pierce armor, extra attack cavalry thanks to the Farimba unique tech, all on the back of the aforementioned longer-lasting gold mines. With Malians, you just get such an interesting civ whose strengths change throughout a game, really encouraging you to make well-timed tech switches. As for maps in which Malians excel, they first jump out as a top-tier nomad civ due to their early wood savings granting them enough resources for an instant fishing ship alongside Persians. But beyond that, Malians are serviceable on most maps, although they are going to favor the more open and aggressive ones compared to the more closed and turtle-y options. I know the civ has actually received quite a few changes, even up to very recently, but I believe that as of now, Malians are at last in that complete state where they don't need any more changes. Hooray, short and easy segment! Last but not least for today, we have everyone's favorite tryhard civ, the Mayans, who are of course going to be part of the Conqueror's expansion. Oh boy, this is going to be controversial, but I am going to put Mayans in the complete tier. So when it comes to the American civ triplets, Mayans are going to be the only one that really prioritizes archers. I mean, they are called an archer civ in the in-game tech tree. But beyond that, when I think about Mayans relative to other archer civs, what really comes to mind is cost efficiency. In the most obvious sense, this is due to their main military bonus of progressively cheaper archers throughout the ages, and that is certainly a big part of it. However, the other aspect of this efficiency is the Mayan economy, where you get 2 nice bonuses. You start with an extra villager at the cost of 50 starting food, which gives you a slight lead economically in the early game, but then you have their main eco bonus where your resources last 15% longer. I will admit that the wording of this bonus isn't super clear, but in practice, it means that you get more out of the various resources on the map. For example, if a Mayan villager chops a tree in the Dark Age, it will walk to the drop-off point with 10 wood, like most civs, but the tree it just chopped down will still have 91.5 wood left on it. This bonus is really impactful in their early game, where you get more food out of your sheep, boar, and deer, and then in the late game where you have more gold and stone to mine than your opponents. This combines with their cheap army to create the situation where you don't need that many villagers to support your strongest post-imperial army. Now, strong army is a relative term with Mayans, because compared to Incas and especially Aztecs, Mayans definitely have the fewest options militarily. You've got your cheap archers, plumed archer unique unit which fills the role of a tanky but low damage cav archer, and Eldorado Eagle Warriors. Yes, I think most players would agree that Eldorado is the best unique tech for Eagle Warriors because it gives them 100 HP, but still, that only gives you 3 good options for gold units, 2 of which are archers. Mayans lack good monks, their siege is the weakest of the American civs, as are their swordsmen. This means that Mayans really do fall off in late game, where they typically need to win before population efficiency becomes a factor. But in general, Mayans are one of the strongest civs on Arabia, and they're at least decent on most other map types. They do have their weaknesses, and like I mentioned in the Aztec section, if I do have an issue with American civs on Arabia, it would mostly be about the laming potential and perhaps overall strength of the Eagle Warrior. Yes, Mayan Eagles are amazing, but I would again divorce any Eagle Warrior issues from any one American civilization. I would also apply this logic logic to issues with battle elephants and steppe lancers, which both have definitely had issues in their time, and probably still do now that I think of it. That aside, Mayans have always been great, so have fun one-tricking them up the ladder, Kappa. With that, we have now gone through 26 civilizations, or 2/3 of the total in the game right now. Like I said at the beginning of the video, everything I discussed here is really 100% subjective, so please let me know what you guys think of the civs we discussed today in the comments. The next part will also be the final part of the series, so stay on the lookout for that. Also, if you're still watching these last few seconds and haven't left a like yet on this video, go do that. But lastly, as always, thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.